I started out with probably less than a week's worth of money to live off of. That's what I
Oh,
started
wow.
with. I
Right.
persevered. Small business, you do what you've got to do and you just keep pushing. You'll get past that tough patch, and then there will be another season, and then there will be another, and so on.
So, Philip, the Chamber of Commerce, as of July 2024, is the article that I was looking at, said 18% of small businesses fail in the first year and 50% fail in the first 5 years. How did you avoid those pitfalls?
Yeah, really good question. And I certainly felt that pressure early on. When I started my business, I didn't actually realize I was starting a business. I thought I'm just earning some money until I get a job. That was sort of my mindset. And, I worked for 5 years just myself. I didn't hire anybody. It was just myself as a consultant. And we've talked about how I got my first gig with a law firm doing tech consulting. They did not have an IT director, as most law firms of that size did not. And they had IT needs, information technology needs, setting up servers, setting up internet, setting up email, etc., word processing, all of these things. That first gig I got with this one law firm, it was a godsend. It was
Hmm.
wonderful. I was able to make my mortgage payment that first month. So,
Hallelujah.
yeah, my first goal was met and I was excited. But pretty soon that excitement wore off because it was one client and it was not a particularly large client. They ran out of things for me to do. And as a consultant, where I'm billing my time, if I didn't have anything to do, I didn't make any money. And so it turned out I was going in, I think, once or twice a week to that particular law firm to do the things that they had, a list of things that needed to be done on their network. Previously, as I've mentioned, before I started my business, I had 4 jobs, 4 different
Right.
places I worked for, and in all of those positions, I was a software engineer or a coder or software programmer, and that was really what I did very well. My emphasis in schooling was software engineering, really knew that very well. I was very good at it, and so one thing that was very important for me, as I mentioned those 4 jobs, and there were things to like and there were things to hate in all 4 of those jobs. But one thing I've learned in my career and in life in general is regardless of the circumstances where you're working or affiliations that you have, never burn bridges. Because you may need a relationship, you may need to call on someone that you worked with in a less than ideal circumstance later on down the road, and that proved true for me. During this time where I am working for this one law firm, and I really hadn't established myself enough to get referrals that would come later, I would start getting referrals for other clients. So I'm going in maybe once or twice a week and billing half a day here, half a day there. It's okay,
Okay.
but not paying all the bills.
Right.
I get a call from job number 1. "Hey,
Hmm.
what are you doing these days?" "Well, I'm started my own business. I'm consulting." "We have the need of just some programming. You are a very good programmer. Could you spare some time to do some contract programming?" "Of course. I've got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. When would you like
Right.
me?" I go
Yes, that's
Friday into the
exactly it.
law firm. So job number 1, which I quit, uh, under a cloud a little bit because it was not doing terribly well at the time. This is 4 or 5 years prior, and I was afraid I was gonna get laid off because the business is not doing well, but I left in good graces, and 4 or 5 years later, they had the need for my services again, and so I began to do contract programming for that company. Job number 2, I stayed there 3 months and told I thought it was a total disaster,
Right.
bad move on my part, never should have taken this job, really kicked myself over that. In the interim time, about 3 or 4 years since that time, that company had been bought out by another company, And there was a gentleman there who I had met. He and I kind of worked together when I was there for that 3 months. So it's a 3 month acquaintance.
Right.
He remembered me somehow and he went with the new company, the buyout company, and
Yeah.
called me up and said, "Hey, we need some programming services. Would you be available to do any contract programming?" And I said, "As a matter of fact, I've got now Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday available."
Sure.
So
Sure.
what I did, I took skills that I had already, didn't have to go to school to learn anything. It's stuff I knew how to do. And I was able to monetize that. At the same time, I'm building a consulting business with the law firm over here on the side. That allowed me to supplement my income and allow me to keep focusing on building this other business until I could get enough revenue to get it over the hump. So I would liken that sort of like today's gig economy. And I
Okay.
see
How
it.
so?
I live in Nashville, so all the time I'm taking an Uber ride somewhere, and 9 times out of 10, my Uber driver is someone who is trying to make it in the music industry, but they're driving Uber to make money in the meantime.
Okay. Do you think you would have been doing that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Anything that I could do to make money to pay the bills and to get my main focus, which was building a consulting business off the ground. The worst thing I could have done is sat there and gone into debt just hoping the next client would knock on my door for the consulting business. What I had to do was redeem the time, if you will, and make
Right.
some money. And so my gig was computer programming. That was my gig. They didn't
Oh,
have Uber back then, but I would have driven an Uber as well. Small business, perhaps why so many fail in the initial years because it is tough getting started. You're
okay.
building credibility. You
Yeah.
don't start out with a lot of credibility. You don't start out with a lot of money. I started out with probably less than a week's worth of money to live off of. That's what I
Oh,
started
wow.
with.
Okay.
And honestly, I did not know of avenues that you could borrow money like SBA loans. I didn't know anything about
Okay.
that. Maybe I'd heard
All
about it,
right.
but I really didn't even know how to go about that. So I did not borrow any money. I just
Oh,
worked on a
wow.
cash basis. I realized the nature of my business, particularly at the beginning, I was selling my time as a consultant. And so I didn't have to buy inventory. I didn't have to have an office, any sort of infrastructure. So that allowed me to operate very lean. And I know not every business is like that, but one mistake I see a lot of startups make is investing heavily on the front end on things like office and bells and whistles. There is some expense needed. You've got to have business cards or whatever it is, website, you
Right.
name it. But operating lean in the early days until you can get a reliable stream of income is so very important.
So
And
what lean? Explain lean in the sense of not just office, but what else would is that using your own vehicle?
I think the tendency is, and I did this a little bit. I started my business in July. So from July to December, the cash flow was not bad. What I didn't do well is budget well for that
Oh,
money. Because one thing all small business owners know is that all the money you take in is not your money. So Uncle Sam gets a big chunk of that money. And I did not
okay.
I guess I knew that in the back of my mind, but until that first year when I sat down with the CPA that had been doing my family's taxes, my dad's taxes, and he did mine also. And he said, "Well, I know you made all this money, but you owe a big check to the IRS because of this." And that was a sobering whoa. And so what I realized is that when that money starts coming in, you've got to partition some of that. You've got to put some over here for tax. You got to put some over here for rainy day. You've got to put some here for
Sure.
investment. And so just being able to budget that out. And I got the handle of that, I think, after year one. Year one was a wake up call that I got to do better at this because I thought I was flush with cash and it turned out not to be the case.
Had you created an LLC, done all basic business, or how did you handle that?
No, I did not. Because as I mentioned, I was in survival mode. So
Okay.
the law firm gig was not in my mind a business. It was just I had
money.
3 things I was doing. I was doing consulting with the law firm, I was doing programming for company 1, and I was doing programming for company 2. And I did all of that. I called myself Hampton Technologies and used my social security number. That's how I filed it. I did not form an LLC until year 3. And the reason I did that, I actually hired at that time a contract person to do a little side gig. And then I decided, oh, I, I'm operating as a business here, even though they weren't a full time employee. It was just a 1099, meaning I didn't pay their taxes and all that sort of thing. Then, on advice of an accounting professional, I formed an LLC, but that was 3 years in.
Okay. All right. How did you go about finding your early employees?
I put ads out, believe it or not, back in the day, and that's how I searched the newspaper for want ads. I know, there's Indeed, there's all
Right.
sorts of
Yes.
Monster, all sorts of things, and we used that certainly in ensuing years. But in the early days, I would just put an ad in the local paper and
Okay.
just
Then
very
whoever
basic,
sent in their resumes.
right? So I had no guidance. Did I have any kind of HR training? None whatsoever. And so I just sat down and formed a questionnaire of things that I thought would elicit whether or not they were good or not. It was off just from my experience. If you kind of know what you're doing, you should be able to answer these types of questions. I made up my questionnaire and I would call somebody in and I would write down. And then after they left, I'd give them a score. And if they
Oh,
made a certain score, I offered them a job. It was that
okay.
simple, that easy. I probably did a million things wrong from an HR perspective, but I did what I knew to do. And I'll never forget my first hire was an excellent, actually, my first 2 hires, excellent hires, and stayed with me for several years.
That's great, especially in areas like you know what your techie needs, but
Right.
to make that connection, evaluate that correctly without that background
So,
is the challenge.
so what happened is as I worked with the law firm and after year 1, year 2, and I had some wins. And that's one thing you want some wins. You want to do something that will get you noticed and you want to make yourself indispensable. And that's what I wanted to do with that client is make it to where if I didn't come in on that Friday, they wanted to know where is Philip. I didn't wait to be told do this, do that. I looked for
Mhm.
things that I could put
Add
myself into
value.
the equation
Okay.
and get noticed. Now, you gotta be careful. You don't wanna puff yourself up above what you can really do. But in my mind, what I was a problem solver. Every business, including law firms, have every business has some technical problems, some technical issues. So my job as I saw it was I am a problem solver. And if I can solve that problem for this client, then that makes me more indispensable to the operation of this business. And that was my goal. And consequently, by doing that, particularly the legal community in Nashville in the day, very well connected, very close knit community. The gentleman that I had originally interviewed with, the lawyer, the techie lawyer, turned out to be my number one cheerleader and introduced me
Oh,
to just about everybody in the legal community in Nashville over the next few years. Really opened doors that I never could have opened myself. So finding those types of people that can be mentors for you, that can be door openers, that can be intros for you into other situations, very key. That was very key for me. So I would say those, in short, those 2 things helped me to survive over years 1, 2, 3, all the way up to year 5, was having a gig that I could do on the side to make money, and number 2,
okay.
finding influencers that could help me expand the business by introducing me to other people that might need my services. Absolutely critical. And without those 2 things, I would not have survived probably after year 1 or year 2.
With the one provide covering the bills, keeping you fresh, just surviving as it were, the other creating your future kind of. One keeping you in the present, one for the future as it were.
That is correct. And I would say the one for the future, I didn't realize that was my future until probably about year 3 when I formed the LLC. I realized I think there is a business here outside just this one firm. By that time, I had acquired probably a couple of other clients. And so I was splitting my time between those 3 or 4 clients. And I realized, okay, there is a need here. I've identified a need. It is not being met sufficiently by the marketplace. I am doing it. I'm limited in my resources, but I think if I keep at this, I could create a market for multiple consultants operating under my umbrella to meet this particular need.
And you're still only in Nashville, correct?
Still only in Nashville at that point in time. Still only in Nashville, operating out of my apartment or my
Okay.
house. Actually, I was actually in a house by that.
Okay. So you're local, you're surviving with multiple gigs, each of them not quite enough to pay all the bills, but together enough to cover everything. How
Right.
many hours a week do you think you were working?
Oh, I'd say 60 at least.
Okay.
Yeah, because it was really kind of an open door for me on the programming. There was no, they wanted code and they wanted it fast. And so as much as I could devote to that, they would pay me for it. And it would ebb
Okay.
and flow. Some months might
Sure.
be more than others, but I worked as much as I could. Absolutely worked as much as I could. And one thing I found, particularly as I began to grow, is that a lot of the administrative things that I had to do, like get bills out,
Sure.
pay bills, all that sort of thing, I did that on
Right.
weekends. Did that on weekends.
Okay.
So Saturdays
A-
devoted to admin stuff.
All right. How did you balance your faith during this hectic time? How did you, both being faithful to church and being faithful to God in your personal walk?
Yeah, it was a challenge. There's no doubt about it. As you know, I'm very involved in my local church. Teach Sunday school class for years. I've been a worship leader, just regular churchgoer, volunteer in prison ministry, other things. And so, that's very valuable to me. My business was very valuable to me as well. And actually saw my business eventually as part of my ministry. It
How
was
so?
part of my ministry. That's what God gave me to do. God gave me the ability to solve problems, and that's what I was
Okay.
doing as a consultant. I felt a calling, to be honest with you. I felt a calling, particularly as I continued on progression and building the business, because there were so many things about leadership and about mentoring people and about having grace for people, both employees and clients. A lot of those things that are just fundamental to being a Christian were
Right.
fundamental to me building a strong foundation for my business. I made it a matter of prayer, and I felt that what I was doing was what God wanted me to do. And there's no better place to be than when you are doing exactly what God called you to do. And it could be digging ditches, it could be driving an Uber, it could be building a tech business, it could be anything. It doesn't have to be something in the church house. But if God has called you to do that, I believe there's an anointing on that. And I felt that many times. But back to your
Right.
question about how I balance sort of church life and business life. There were times it was tough because I was a one-man show for 5 years.
Right.
And if the nature of my business is I am working on networks, I'm working on computer technology, and those types of jobs are pretty much 24/7. If something goes wrong and somebody needs something, I'll never forget. You'll love this story, Kent. So on a rare Saturday that I had nothing pressing I had to do, I was just kind of sleeping in. I was like, oh, hope there's nothing that goes wrong today. I get a call. It's like 6 o'clock, 6:30 in the morning, something like that.
Ooh.
Woke me up Saturday morning. And the person on the other end did not say, I'm sorry to wake you. I'm sorry to bother you on a weekend. Didn't even say, hello, how are you? I answered the phone, hello. And the voice on the other end goes, what happened to the network? I'm like, nothing's working. I don't know who it is. I don't have caller ID at that point. I don't know
Right.
who it
Right.
is. Nothing's working. I can't print. What's wrong with the network? they were hair was on fire. And so I wiped the sleep out of my eye and I'm like, "Excuse me, who is this?" And so they proceeded to tell me that it was an emergency and no one could print and they had to have so many documents printed for this particular attorney and some choice words, I better get on
Yes.
my horse and get something done.
Right.
So I pulled myself out of bed, put a hat on, drove downtown, fixed the issue. It was something minor, fixed it so they could print their precious documents. I got back home, and so I thought, I'm just gonna check back in. I called and I said, "Hey, just wanna make sure everything worked okay after that." "Oh, yeah, fine," and he was able to get everything printed so he could get to the Kentucky Derby.
Oh,
That was the emergency. He had
that
to
was the
leave for the
emergency.
Kentucky Derby.
Humanity.
So
Yeah.
I rejoiced
That's right.
that I was able to help this
Yes.
attorney get to the
Yeah.
Kentucky Derby without missing a beat.
That's right.
And
Is
so
that yes.
so that's just a little
Well,
bit of the nature of,
that's
what I was doing and the responsibility I felt. And so, did that ever happen and interfere with church? Absolutely. There were times, a few times, I was singing in church, either in the choir, on the worship team, and I get a buzz on my phone. And when I'm the man, I have to look at my phone even when I'm in church, and I would have to excuse myself from the platform, go find a laptop and fix an issue, and then come back into church. That was my life. That was my life for several years. But you know
right.
what?
That's right.
I
Go ahead.
persevered. Small business, you do what you've got to do, and you just keep pushing. You'll get past that tough patch, and then there will be another season, and then there will be another, and so on. I told you those 2 gigs that kept me going probably 4 or 5 years. There was a time, and maybe I'll talk about this next episode, where my business kinda via a hoax, I'll leave you with that teaser. Via a
Mm,
hoax, my business jumped to the next level, but it was a hoax.
wow.
And I had to make a decision. Do I go with the next level and give up this safe thing that I've got over here? Or
Right.
do I let go of my security blanket and pursue this bright, shiny new star that is not fully there yet, but potential? And I had to make that decision to let go of the security blanket. Tough decision.
Of course, the whole point of a security blanket is you feel secure and you're comfortable with how things are working.
It was working well, but it was not scalable and it was not going to get any bigger because I was working 60 plus hours a week.
Got it.
So, yeah, maybe
Yep.
we'll talk about that next time.
All right. Can't wait to hear about it.